The race is on, and F1 is back and heading to the classic Spa circuits. But could this be the weekend that turns around Ferrari's fortunes? And what should we expect from Red Bull in the wake of Christian Horner's shock departure? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to look ahead to the Belgian Grand Prix are Josh Suttill and John Noble. Well, John, we'll come to you first. It's been quite a fun gap, this, isn't it? We had that frenetic activity early on, and then it's actually felt like there's been actually a bit of a pause for once.
Yeah, it's been incredible. I think it's the longest spell I think a lot of Formula One people have had at home since pre-season testing, which is quite remarkable. I've said to many people, I think a lot of people are quite tired around Silverstone and suggesting that the year basically divides into two phases. You're either at Formula One or you're at home recovering from Formula One. So this has been a kind of a nice little bit of a mini summer break. It's not been quiet because there's obviously a lot of things happening, but it's been quite good. And I think everyone will be a bit refreshed when they get back in there for Spa.
Yeah, it's going to be all guns blazing for the Spa Budapest doubleheader. And Josh, good to have you back on the podcast. You're going to be joining us in both of those races. So you've had a brief break and then going to be heading for a couple of weeks of flat-out action.
Yeah, I can't complain. First time going to Spa, so that's a big one off the bucket list. Looking forward to seeing it in person and how it all works.
Oh, have you never done Spa before? That's
never done Spa. Yeah, it's top three probably for my bucket list.
I predict what will surprise you about Spa is just how steep Eau Rouge is. That's the impression I remember. I first went there more than 20 years ago and sort of parked by it, and then you'll see that because that's where the media car park is. It's amazing, isn't it, John? The steepness of Eau Rouge. I think even no matter how many times you go back there, there's always that moment where you think, oh yeah, that is really, really steep, isn't it?
Well, it's not just steep. It just looks cool. Every time you get the kind of shuttle bus or you walk in from the media car park, you go into the tunnel that's on that run down to Eau Rouge. So you get to see kind of the dip and the climb up to Radillon. It just looks fantastic. It looks incredible. I mean, it's not the challenging corner it once was because it's easy flat in qualifying now for these cars, but you still cannot take away it's spectacular, and it still perfectly proves that all good Formula One tracks need a decent bit of elevation.
Exactly, yeah. There's not actually that many of them. I guess Kota, the run up to turn one, the Senna S at Interlagos going the other way spring to mind, but there's not so many of them. So yeah, another reason to enjoy Spa. But it should be a really interesting weekend. There's lots of storylines brewing, and obviously one of them, John, is Ferrari's rear suspension upgrade that we've been waiting for quite a while now. So we have seen a glimpse of this. What do you expect from Ferrari, and what have you seen so far from the glimpses of the changes?
Yeah, this has been a kind of a bubbling story all season. I mean, Ferrari haven't offered very much kind of insight and explanation of the weaknesses of their car, but they've clearly got a problem with kind of pinning it into the perfect ride height. I think they've been compromised in where they can run it, especially in high-speed corners and especially in races when the car's heavier with fuel. It appears that if it's full of fuel and it's going through a high-speed corner, the downforce levels are higher. It's pushing the car down onto the ground. It's wearing the plank down at the back. This is what exposed them in China when Lewis Hamilton got disqualified. So they've had to kind of battle away compromises. One way they've done it is Charles Leclerc, moved to a more extreme setup, just taking downforce off the rear of the car, for example, just trying to stop that car being pushed down. But it's been a handicap for them all season. So they've made some alterations to the mechanical aspect. They feel it's important. If it can unlock a little bit more performance in pushing that car, allowing that car to run a bit closer to the ground without risking the plank being worn down, then that's a great thing. But more than that is if it can give the drivers a bit more confidence, a bit more feel, a bit more belief in that they can push things to the limit, then I think that the kind of gains will be compounded and there will be a big step forward. So I'm not expecting a dramatic transformation and they bolt out the Ferraris from the pits and on Friday morning and they're P12 and it roars away. But it should be a step. And I think in the way Formula 1 is at the moment, a tiny little step can make a big difference, especially in Q3.
Yeah, it's going to be that kind of impossible to quantify it, isn't it? Because at the moment, I think the average qualifying deficit is just under 0.4. And maybe you'd say an upgrade like this and in all terms, maybe it would be 1/10 and maybe that would chip away. But if it can open up the setup window, if it can give the drivers more confidence, then actually you could maybe see a bigger gain than that. And a bigger gain is needed because, like I say, that is quite a meaty deficit for Q3. We've seen the Ferrari lose a lot of performance there. And really that's been a big lingering issue, hasn't it, Ed? It's kind of been, well, they've looked all right on Sundays, but they kind of start too far back or the pace just falls away when it gets to Q3. So maybe the crucial question for them is this upgrade in any way going to stop that trend.
Yeah, it's quite a tantalising prospect, and we'll see the exact performance profile of it. But obviously, they're getting more mechanical control, if you like, from the invisible bits of the upgrade. There is a bit of a geometry change, but also damping changes at the rear, which is related to the fact they moved the cockpit back. They had to shorten the gearbox because they couldn't change the wheelbase. So that meant they were a little bit more stuck for space in terms of the damping. And so that's been revised. So that should give them more control. And it's one of those things that's quite interesting because you don't kind of get magic bullets, but if you take into account the fact that this car has kind of not been running where it should have done for a while, and the fact that the lower you run these cars, the more performance there is, this could be one of those rare ones, couldn't it, John, where there is a good global all-round performance. I agree, it shouldn't just suddenly make them brilliant or anything, but they're the one team who could kind of flick a switch that might put them in a position to pick up some stronger results in the second half of the season. Certainly they've made noise about at least wanting to fight for a few wins in the second half of the year.
Yeah, I think there's two examples this season of these kind of car changes that aren't necessarily one where you run them through the computer and the computer says it's 2 tenths faster, this equals 3 grid positions. It's more a change about lifting drivers' confidence and driver feel. So we see what happens at Sauber, for example. They had a car very decent levels of downforce, that they could overcome some weaknesses in qualifying. You know, Nico Hülkenberg very strong at the start of the season, but it was terrible in dirty air, terrible in races, terrible at starts, terrible at safety car restarts, and invariably he and Gabriele Bortoleto would drift to the back of the grid and it'd be difficult to come forward. They revised their car, bought some floor aerodynamic things to give it a more consistent feel, driver confidence up, they're away. And it's the same at Aston Martin as well. That they had an upgrade at Imola, tiny upgrade, it wasn't dramatic, but it allowed Fernando to feel more at one with the car. He's been able to push it harder, and they've been back in the points, back into Q3, and all looking a bit better. So I think Ferrari will be hoping a similar thing, that there's no magic bullet solution here, but it's a step. And maybe it just takes a little step to make the car quicker, a little step to make Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton better in Q3. They move 1 or 2 grid positions up, and then they're in a much better position on Sunday because the race pace of that car has been pretty strong all season.
Yeah, I mean, the championship is gone for Ferrari, isn't it? But that doesn't mean they can't still have results that will mean a lot to them, because if they can get into a position where they can fight for regular podiums and wins, it's not really going to matter. But there's a 238-point gap to McLaren, and they fall short of that. The main thing will be showing that they can be a credible threat, and also, you know, show that they can develop a front-running car in season. We've seen that a little bit last year, and look how much stronger Ferrari were by the end of the season. If they can, I think, repeat that, then that'll be a success, even if they're going to, I think, end up, you know, well short of McLaren at the end of the year.
How important do you think it is, John, that Ferrari do salvage something from this season? How much do they need to salvage? I'm thinking all of the pressure that was on Fred Vasseur earlier on, the fact they're the one of the big teams that hasn't won a race this year. They could conceivably get a few wins and maybe get second in the constructors. Would that be quite a good save from where they are?
I think it's direction of travel, isn't it? F1's all about momentum and where are things going? Are you going in the right direction? Do you understand where your weaknesses are? Do you understand where the strengths are coming from? Are you pushing forwards? Or are you, if you made a mistake, you step back, you're lost, you're kind of trailing around and floundering and don't know what's happening. So I think from that perspective, it is important that Ferrari, this upgrade works. It is important the team knows it's understood what the weaknesses were in this design, because it's something that will carry over into 2026. This is what Fred Vasseur talked about, I think, around Imola time. That aero developments, you know, they're winding down now. The focus is on 26, but mechanical components like this, a mechanical understanding of the car, the weaknesses that they've got this season are really, really important, because they will carry over into 26. It's understanding dynamics. The cars are different next year, but there's still a lot of fundamental similarities between what's going to make a successful current car, what will make a successful car to the new regulations. So I think they need the answers. If they get the answers, if they can get an uptick, if they can start challenging nearer the front, maybe getting a win or two, I think they'll view that as a success, considering how bad things looked 4 or 5 races ago.
It'll be quite illuminating Spa, I suspect, Josh, not just because the track is quite a good test of a car, and obviously twinned with Budapest, which is a very different circuit. That's going to be a good couple of weekends to judge the car on. The drivers are going to make it pretty clear, aren't they? Because Charles Leclerc has been pretty miserable at times this year, and he's coming off the back of a particularly miserable Silverstone. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton's had some tough times. So I think it's going to be one of those ones where the mood of the two drivers will be very, very clear, and they probably won't be able to help saying something positive if there's something positive there to be talked about. And the corollary of that is, if it's not the step they hope for, I'm sure it'll be pretty clear from them as well.
Yeah, both of them have huge success at both those circuits, so we know that they're capable of the right performances. Just depends if they've got the car. I guess the other thing about Spa as well is that you're on, I think, full throttle about 75% of the lap. And coming back to this Q3 problem that I mentioned earlier, obviously think it could be possibly some kind of engine power unit issue. And part of that is that, when the engine kind of overheats when you're on full throttle too much. And obviously Spa has you're on full throttle, like I say, a lot of the time. So it's going to be quite a good test of how they solve this problem, because we could see the pace maybe early on in practice, Q1, Q2, but is it going to be there on Q3? Obviously, it is a sprint weekend as well, so they're not going to have much time to get their head around things. And an FP1 will get an instant kind of performance reveal on Friday afternoon in sprint qualifying of, has there been any step forward, and is that carried all the way through? Especially interesting, I think, for Lewis Hamilton, because he did have a good Silverstone weekend. You could say, okay, he should have been on the podium because, a Sauber was on the podium. Maybe Hamilton will feel slightly disappointed not to get that. But he did actually have quite a promising weekend. We've seen this season, though, it's been an absolute roller coaster. It's been really hard for Hamilton in particular to string consecutive positive weekends together. But Silverstone was one. Let's see, can he do that at Spa and Budapest? Two tracks, obviously, he's got so much success on. And they're actually very different circuits. So if he can, then that'll be quite a big statement of how his season is going, or we'll see whether this roller coaster season continues for him.
The mention of the sprint weekend's important, I guess, John, because that does mean just the one free practice session. Obviously, they did the promotional day of running at Fiorano with the car, so you can do 200 kilometres on those now. So they've had a bit of a chance to play with it, but that could be an interesting challenge for Ferrari, couldn't it? Working out exactly what ride height they can in the real world put it at. So that will make Friday quite stressful, and they'll probably have to decide how conservative or attacking they are with that ride height overall at a point where they're not necessarily 100% sure in the real world how it's going to behave.
Yeah, I think it was important they got some answers on this suspension before they kind of turned up at Spa. They had the filming day, which is classified as a filming day, but obviously not much film gets released from it. This test at Mugello, 200 kilometres in total between two drivers, which probably just gathering a lot of data. They wouldn't be allowed to play around with setups. They wouldn't be allowed to do much analysis. It's on demo tyres, so it's not real world conditions as such, but it will give them a first inkling of what's to come. And then there is one practice session. But I think if they've got this far, they've worked in the suspension, it will have been tested at the factory, it will have run on the track, there'll be more tests taking place in the factory. They'll already have a lot of understanding of where it's at. They'll have been with it in the simulator. So it's not as if you turn up at track now, completely clueless as to what an upgrade is going to do. So I think they will feel happy with it. And they'll also know that even though you're straight into qualifying on Friday, Parc Fermé does open up after the sprint race on Saturday, so you can make further adjustments. And let's not forget, Ferrari have been great in sprints this year. Lewis Hamilton won in China. It then went wrong on Sunday. So they've been more comfortable in sprints, the lower level of fuel in sprints. Key now will be not necessarily what they do on Friday, Saturday, it's how it goes on Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there could be a benefit from having gone through the sprint race and then changing the setup. So whatever happens, Ferrari should come out of this weekend with a very, very good understanding of what they've got, which I guess is the number one priority. Right, Josh, another thing about Spa, Pirelli's tyre allocation. First time since 2022 Australian Grand Prix, there's a gap in the tyre allocations. So usually it's a block of 3 adjacent compounds, but for Spa, it's going to be C1, C3 and C4. What effect do you expect that to have?
Yeah, it should hopefully increase the likelihood of a two-stop race. I mean, we did have a two-stop race last year at Spa, so I expect to see the same. I'm a big fan of this. I didn't like the Monaco change. That felt a bit too artificial to me, mandating the 2 pit stops. To me, just skipping a tyre compound step, that feels like a sensible, pragmatic solution. And I'm interested to see how it shakes things up. I don't think it's going to make a massive difference, but if it can just make a little difference, just give a little bit more of a challenge for the teams to get their heads around, especially on a sprint weekend, then I'm all for it. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how it plays out.
These ones are always so difficult to judge, aren't they, John? Because Pirelli will always have a go with this sort of thing. But obviously, there's only so many tyre compounds, and it's difficult to know whether the gap will just mean that there's such a big gap between the C3 and C1 pace that it'll just push everyone into a very obvious strategic approach, and it being close enough to really make the big difference and make that be a big choice, isn't it? So I guess that's the key question.
Yeah, but this year's actually been interesting from a tyre perspective. I think maybe because the start of the season was so poor in terms of strategy options that the one-stoppers forced a response. We got the C6, came out early. Obviously, we had it at Imola, we had it at Monaco, we had it in Canada. And it's opened up a lot of variety in terms of how teams are dealing with stuff through the weekend. This isn't just about Sundays. It's what tyres you use in practice, what tyres you use in qualifying, and what tyres you use in the race. I think it'll be the same story this weekend, because it's, not only have we got this gap in the compound, it's a sprint weekend where the teams get one fewer set of tyres, and they're forced to use the mediums in sprint qualifying as well. So you've got to use a medium in sprint qualifying 1 and sprint qualifying 2, and you've got to burn a soft in sprint qualifying 3. So they've got 4 mediums for the weekend. They've got to burn 2 in qualifying. So then if it's a 2-stopper in the race, and you want to get through 2 sets of mediums, that's your set of 4 tyres burned up already. But you obviously want to do at least some running on Friday with the medium to find out what it's doing. So teams are already going to be on the back foot a little bit. Are they going to be gambling more on, do you not run a medium in Friday and just burn it in practice, burn it in sprint qualifying, see how it goes? Do you risk it to know where the gap is with the hards? I think there are a lot of options and a lot of differences. And then also, let's not forget, it's Spa. The weekend can kind of turn in an instant. So we could get rain thrown into the mix as well. So I do quite like these weekends where there is this bit of tyre uncertainty. And it's often more interesting when they are restricted on tyres. They don't quite have enough to get through the weekend. So at some point, you've got to choose where your compromise is made.
Yeah, and that in itself means more strategic variety, because if you're forced into making a compromise choice, you're more likely to have variation, aren't you, in terms of there might be 2 paths that you could take and you've got to choose one or the other, whereas when there's a little bit more room for manoeuvre, you can switch around. But again, I don't think you should expect Pirelli to create miracles or transform the racing completely, but they're always willing to do these little experiments, and it's a useful thing to try that should make for a good talking point. Should we move on now for what I suspect is going to be a huge discussion point on the Thursday, John, which of course is the world of Red Bull and Racing Bulls? We talked extensively about Christian Horner's ousting. What do we think we should expect from Spa in terms of what those in the world of Red Bull are talking about, and the general approach and strategy just to the team off track?
I think there's going to be 2 interesting factors to the weekend. First of all is, what is Max Verstappen's response going to be on Thursday? Obviously, his future, what is he going to do for 26? What is he going to do for 27? Have been huge topics of intrigue and speculation over recent weeks. Obviously, the Christian Horner element, we know his father, Jos, wasn't a massive fan of Christian's. They've had their kind of disagreements over recent seasons. So in one respect, you could say that Christian Horner leaving the team strengthens the chance of Max staying, because that one source of friction has disappeared. But equally, Christian delivered all the success that Red Bull had. He was the one who brought Max Verstappen in. He's the one who made it into a multiple championship winning team. So you've lost all that knowledge and expertise and history and guidance and leadership. So is it the same Red Bull team going forwards? What does Max want to see? What is Max thinking about 26? Is he sticking to, we understand the situation was leaving Silverstone, that it doesn't make sense to jump in somewhere else for next year, because if you get it wrong in 26, it's basically 2-3 years of being stuck in the wrong team. So better to sit tight for 26 at Red Bull, see where that lies, and make your call then for 27. So that's the first aspect. And then the second, I think, is, how does Red Bull react? Is it a team now that's going to become very corporate? Is it a team that's not going to deal with the press much anymore? Is it a team that's going to be distant? Is it going to be the same kind of team that we had known it to be under Christian Horner? That I don't know. I mean, so far, it's been very difficult to get any kind of word out from the team, because it seems to have kind of stepped back into corporate Formula One.
Yeah, they've very much taken that approach. So I'm interested to see who from Red Bull on the corporate side is there. Is Mintzlaff going to be there? Because one of the things that's clear is that Laurent Mekies being the team principal, he's not going to be a CEO. Well, he's the CEO technically. He's not going to be the CEO team principal in the Horner mold, is he? Certainly, he'll do some of what Horner did, the more team sort of side of things. But I'm interested to see whether there's any wider Red Bull presence.
And it's completely different personality, isn't it? Taking over, it's complete. I wouldn't say probably the opposite to Christian Horner. And I think what that means is that we're probably not going to be seeing quite the same number of sound bites or kind of, shots across the bows that we'd sometimes see from Horner. I doubt. I think we're going to see a bit of a period of calm and kind of settling in. I imagine the response from Mekies will be kind of, I'm assessing everything. I'm getting to grips with the team. I'm putting plans into place. I think it's going to be his aim will probably be for a bit of a period of calm to kind of get away from so much of the noise that has surrounded this team for a long time, which Horner, dealt with in good and bad ways, I think, and was very happy to kind of put himself forward and be at the coalface of that publicity. I can't see the same happening from Mekies unless you guys disagree. I think we're going to see a reserve presence. So therefore, I'm interested to see is somebody else from within Red Bull going to be more of the public face, because anybody watching the UK will know from watching their coverage on Sky Sports that Christian Horner is basically one of the main characters, almost kind of one of the main pundits on there. I'm interested to see if Mekies is going to do the same thing. I kind of doubt it, so I'm interested to see if somebody else from Red Bull will take up that role.
Yeah, I don't see Laurent Mekies getting involved in knockabout sound bites with Toto Wolff and Zach Brown. I certainly don't see that. And I would imagine, John, that Mekies' approach is really to focus on the sort of race team side, just get through these couple of weeks. Because remember, in organisations, when these changes happen, there's a kind of an assumption sometimes on the outside that it's all clean internally. But I imagine there will be people inside who aren't really sure about how much Red Bull wider involvement there'll be, how will things change, what will it be like. So they'll also have questions. So Laurent Mekies just has to say, right, let's focus on doing what you always do, what you do so well, just running the car and doing the job. And that probably should mean they can get through this doubleheader and then regroup with the August break.
Yeah, I think he's got a massive challenge on his hands. It's never easy taking over from someone who's had as big a presence as Christian Horner has, stepping into his shoes. I think job number one for Mekies is getting Max Verstappen to stay, because if Max goes, then the task and that future of that team is much, much more difficult. So that's his number one task. He's got to get the team behind him. So needs everyone pushing in the same direction. I'm sure he'll be meeting people. He's a very capable team boss. Amiable personality, has got stuff done, knows how to run a racing team. The question is, there's a big, big difference between running a team that's fighting for top 6, top 5 positions and one that's battling for wins, one that's, potentially fighting for world championships, and one that's your rivals are out to pull the rug from underneath you at every second of the way. People will be out to kind of destabilize Red Bull. They'll be out to poach staff. They'll be out to cause trouble. I think that's one of the difficult tasks. And this is something that Christian Horner was very, very good at, was managing those external pressures, which can often be much harder to deal with sometimes than the internal pressures of getting your team and your staff behind you.
I imagine the experience Mekies has at Ferrari is probably going to be the most useful for that, because he saw when he was under Fred Vasseur, wasn't he, as a kind of deputy role. He saw the pressure there that Vasseur was under, and it's kind of similar what he's going to now face. I think outside of taking up the job at Ferrari, there's not a bigger challenge in Formula One than taking over such a big team as Red Bull, especially one that's expanding in the way it is with its powertrain division. So yeah, I think that Ferrari experience is going to be useful because he's in a very similar scenario to kind of any new Ferrari boss, with all the pressure from various quarters.
Yeah, and with the added challenge of the fact that he's coming from a team where he had a CEO there in Peter Bayer, didn't he? So that kind of split almost the Horner role across two people within Racing Bulls. And I think probably Horner's going to be the last of the all-powerful team principals, really, isn't he? He didn't own Red Bull, but he was kind of an old-school team boss in that he had so much control over the Red Bull Racing, the Red Bull F1 side of things, whereas Mekies, for him, it'll be a little bit different. So, yeah, it's funny, isn't it, John? Because it's a difficult time with all the uncertainty about the car. The car sometimes is good, sometimes isn't. Max Verstappen can pull some performances out. You've got that huge amount of pressure on Yuki Tsunoda. So it's one of those ones where whichever way Mekies looks, there are problems to be tackled. So even though it's kind of carry on as you are, it's carry on as you are in this difficult troubleshooting phase when things aren't quite as they should be there.
Yeah, and it's a team that, even we in the media and in the paddock, people in the paddock were talking about Austria Silverstone time, about this is a team potentially on a precipice that if it loses Max Verstappen to somebody else, if the Red Bull engine next season isn't any good and it's a long slog back to the front of the grid, then things can go wrong very, very quickly. And as I mentioned earlier about Ferrari, F1's a lot about momentum and where is your direction of travel? Are you in that phase of building and harnessing people and pushing forwards and be moving to the top like McLaren were over 4 or 5 years, or are you in a situation where it's going the wrong direction? You've lost some key staff, you've lost your team boss, you're about to lose your star driver, you're about to have a step back on engines. Things are going to get much more difficult. So there's a lot to sort out and an awful lot of risk and equally a lot of opportunity that present themselves over the next 6 months. Because I think where Red Bull are now, it's not going to be where they are in 12 months' time. And we could be kind of redefining what we know of Red Bull by the time we're midway through the 26th season.
And it's a bit chicken and egg because his number one task is to make Max Verstappen stay. But the only way you do that is by solving all the other problems, because that's the only reason he'll stay. So it's a really, really big challenge. I guess there's only really two things he can do. Number one is make sure that the team is functioning well operationally and does a good job with the car it has now, because he's going to have obviously no impact on this car. It's all just about getting the most out of it trackside, something I think he's been very good at Racing Bulls. Let's see if he can do that in a top team. And then number two is just taking an overview of how this team is working, what's been going right, what's been going wrong. And that will probably be a 6 months process at least. We've seen with other people coming in at team boss CEO roles, they need that processing time. The only problem is, you need to do that quickly because you need to secure Verstappen. So I think the job will probably be taking a big assessment of what needs changing, presenting that to Verstappen and saying, look, this is what I think is wrong with the team. This is what I think the team needs. This is what I'm going to do over the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, and kind of present that as a plan to the Max camp. And then I guess hope that Max sees that plan and goes, yeah, that makes sense. This is similar to what I've been seeing as well. I think this plan is going to work and I'll stick around.
And then in amongst all of this, you've got Yuki Tsunoda, who's trying to get his head around a tricky car. He's had a horrible run. Obviously, we're getting to the point where Red Bull will start to think about what the plan is for that seat moving forward, especially once they know what's happening with Verstappen. I mean, still definitely most likely he will continue at Red Bull Racing. But if you're Yuki Tsunoda, there's this maelstrom going on around you, and you've somehow got to get your head around that car and prove that you are the guy they need for 2026. So how do you think he'll respond to that, John? Do you think it'll be fairly neutral for him because he's got this huge task on and he can't really afford to worry about that? Or could it have a negative or a positive effect for him?
I think Mekies' arrival is probably good news for him in the short term because, Mekies knows Yuki's strengths. He's worked with him in the past. He's got a comparison, a reference point of what did work for him at Racing Bulls RB, what hasn't worked for him at Red Bull. So it's not as if you've got a new team boss coming in who's kind of sacked you as a driver in the past and doesn't like you and your days are numbered. You've got a team boss coming in who knows you, understands you, would love to have kept you, but had to let you go because the big team came knocking. And I think in terms of the priorities that Laurent's got to get on top with at Red Bull, I think the second Red Bull seat isn't anything to worry about in the short term. He needs to sort Max's future out. He needs to get that team all pointing in the right direction. He needs to address some of the infrastructure weaknesses. He needs to show the direction of travel is going to move forwards. He needs to get on top of the 26 engine project. I think worrying about, should it be Yuki Tsunoda? Should it be Liam Lawson? Should it be someone like Valtteri Bottas in the second seat? Isn't going to feature in his big list of things to worry about now. So I think short term it's good for Yuki, but I still is going to need to lift his performance if they're going to kind of roll into 26 with an unchanged driver lineup.
Yeah, he knows Yuki very well, but I guess he also knows Isaac Hadjar, kind of the most likely man to replace him. So he's in quite a weird position, isn't he, where he's worked with both drivers and could have actually quite an interesting perspective on who should partner Verstappen next year, because he's worked with both candidates. He's worked with Liam Lawson as well, probably not a candidate to get back into Red Bull, but he's got quite an interesting overview of Red Bull's lineup as a whole. So that's one positive, but I agree with John. I don't think it's going to be even within his top 5 priorities.
Yeah, I guess it's the main focus for Tsunoda himself, though. So perhaps having this extra week's break may have helped him a little bit to kind of gather his thoughts and try and formulate a new approach to lift his performances. Right, Josh, now we're going to delve into the world of Formula 2. Although we only occasionally have time to venture into the junior categories on this podcast, it is something the Race Members Club on Patreon hears about a little more regularly. Can you just tell our non-members a little bit more about that relatively new offering focusing on the junior categories?
Yeah, so I've had loads and loads of requests over the past few months, years, to talk more about Formula 2, Formula 3, F1 Academy, all the plethora of junior series below F1. And we felt like the best place for that was kind of a dedicated podcast that looks at mainly Formula 2, Formula 3, but also occasionally delves into other series as well. The schedule is more or less kind of, we just go with the big gaps in the calendar and fill it with a podcast. So there's one out right now that you can listen to in this gap, and then there'll be one in the summer as well. And again, throughout the year, it's myself, Samarth Kanal, who you'll all be familiar with as well, and Val as well, who many of you will be familiar with on F1, MotoGP, pretty much crops up everywhere, and various other people as well will be cropping up through the year. So yeah, it's basically a look into what's going on beneath Formula 1, how the F1 Junior Academies work. That's the latest episode, is kind of assessing each team's approach and which team has the best junior roster and things like that. So yeah, very much a new project, but one that hopefully you'll be interested to hear more about, and there'll be lots more from over the coming months.
You know, I listened in on that latest recording while it was happening. In a non-speaking role, I was just listening to it out of interest. And
you did provide some flight information as well for Samarth, didn't you?
Well, I couldn't resist when
somehow, yeah.
When a mystery helicopter turned up, I had to cross-reference it, and that's my one contribution.
Was it your helicopter, Ed?
Well, you know, it's my personal one. I had to apologise for flying a little bit low. It's very inconsiderate of me, but yeah, we've always got to travel in style, haven't you? But no, if you're interested in listening to that, plus all, of course, the other bonus content that includes ad-free podcasts, early publishing of videos, our popular in-car insights chats during race weekend, question asking privileges for this podcast, click the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for The Race. But Josh, we are going to talk a little bit about F2 now. We've got 6 of the 14 F2 rounds left now. Is anyone pinging loudly on the F1 radar based on their exploits this year?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of drivers who are. Most people already be probably familiar with them because they made kind of a fairly big impact, especially in Austria, obviously. Alex Dunn, the McLaren junior, did a very good job, impressed the F1 team, and has been impressing them for quite a long time. Had a quite patchy F3 season last year, was very nearly dropped, but Warren Hughes, who kind of spearheads the program, felt like Dunn had a lot more potential than, I think he finished something like 14th, 15th in the championship. He felt like he had a lot more potential, said to McLaren, look, please give him a chance. Let's see what he can do in more powerful machinery in F2. And indeed, Dunn's been absolutely mega, massive raw pace. McLaren, like I say, very excited about him. Obviously, they do have Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri tied down. So there's that classic problem of where does he go? They had a similar problem with Gabriele Bortoleto, who obviously they let go and were happy to let him make his debut with Sauber. I'm not so sure McLaren will be doing the same with Dunn, just because I feel like they rate him perhaps even higher. And also they're probably quite keen to have a junior option in their back pocket, if anything is to go wrong with Norris and Piastri in the next few years. Apart from that, you got Arvid Lindblad as the other big name. I mean, he made, I don't know about you guys, but probably a bit more of a lower key debut in Silverstone. Did a decent job for in his first FP1. I think that's partly down to what the teams give them in terms of run plan and, you know, letting them push. Red Bull historically give quite a kind of a conservative FP1 embedding, and that was the case with Lindblad. But he's absolutely mega. He's got massive amounts of pace. The super license has been approved for him as well now. A lot of people obviously thought that was Red Bull kind of reacting to how he's done in F2, but remember they lodged that petition right at the start of the year, so they've rated Lindblad for a long time. In fact, Christian Horner was quite a big advocate of Lindblad as well. I suspect the new management will feel the same. I don't think anything will change there. So they're the big two. There are obviously a lot of other drivers on the grid who could probably do the job in F1. But for me, they're probably the two who are most likely to get a chance. Lindblad has a much clearer route into an F1 seat immediately, whether that be before the end of the year even or for next year. Like I say, Dunn is a bit more of an open question.
But of course, the championship leader is Richard Vasseur, who dates back to 2021 in F2. He's 24-year-old. He's on Red Bull's books once, wasn't he? I seem to remember. So I guess that's the interesting thing. You've got one of these veteran drivers who's there leading the points.
Yeah, I think it's always been part of feeder series, hasn't it? Where you have these really young talents fighting against less young talents who, are very, very good racing drivers in their own right. Richard Vasseur, like you say, was on Red Bull's books and I think was a bit of a lost talent. He was right up there with a lot of drivers who are performing very well in both Formula One and other major motorsport championships. I'm sure Vasseur will do the same, not in Formula One, but wherever he goes next. He has said this is his last year, which he has said before, and then you turned on that and carried on when a bit of money appeared. But I think this is actually his last year. So yeah, he will be moving on. But like I say, you always have these yardsticks, which is quite interesting for drivers to compare themselves. There's also Victor Martin as well, who's in his third year, obviously being picked up by Williams this year, which was quite an interesting move. Did a good job in his FP1 debut early this year in Barcelona, I think. So yeah, there's a few experienced guys. It's an age-old debate, isn't it, whether there should be an age cap. But I think someone like Vasseur is just a good benchmark for the likes of Dunn and Lindblad to compare themselves to.
John, how would you say F2 is regarded in the F1 paddock these days, particularly by the decision makers in teams?
Yeah, I think it is followed, just as Formula 3 is followed as well. And I think all the smart teams are always checking out what's going on in the junior categories. The old format of all the kind of the national Formula 3 championships into kind of the Macau Grand Prix end of season finale. Then you went to whether it's F2000, GP2, Formula 2. It's kind of more unified now under the F1 banner. But you've got F3 and F2 right under the noses of the F1 team bosses. And I think while you can't look at individual race results as such, because reverse grids in junior categories can always kind of shake things up, I think the intelligent team bosses do keep an eye on what's really going on, do dig deeper into the figures. And I think we've seen it time and time again that the cream rises to the top in these championships and that the true stars do come out and show what they can do. Like you look at Piastri, you look at Leclerc, you look at George Russell. And I think, probably Alex Dunn as well now is stepping up. Lindblad's showing it as well. They do show this kind of brilliance in these categories. So you look beyond the incidents, you look beyond the retirements, you look beyond the struggles of difficult race weekends, and you just do realise that these are the 3-4, top line guys in F2 who are going to be in Formula One over the next few years.
Yeah, it has become harder than ever, I guess, in recent years for the teams to judge, because you have Kimi Antonelli, Ollie Behrman, both really far down the championship last year in F2. You look at purely based on the results and think, okay, these guys are not F1 talents, but what they've done this year, I think, has proved that they've at least got the potential to be, and they're kind of right up there with Bortoleto and Hadjar, who are 1-2 in the championship, which, again, backs up John's point of, the cream did rise to the crop, and maybe there was also some cream further down, but didn't quite rise. It's sort of a weird scenario, but the teams put their faith in Antonelli and Behrman and believed in them and knew they would be good and followed through and put them in F1 seat and have been paid back. So yeah, one of the biggest tools has become the simulator and the F1 work behind the scenes. F1 teams will use on a normal weekend. Obviously, they'll have the race team at the track, but they'll also have a team back at base, and often they'll use a junior driver, put them into the simulator, and they basically become the third or fourth driver of a team on a weekend, and that is like fundamental, especially on a Friday after practice. So much data is sent back, working on the ideal setup before qualifying, and those drivers are fundamental to it, and the ones that kind of really impress and make a big impression. That is really important for their F1 prospects. It's the same for Behrman in particular, really impressed, Bortoleto. So yeah, that can say a lot, and that's almost same with the kind of the private testing as well, and the FP1s. You kind of building this puzzle of is an F1 driver good, and I feel like the piece of the puzzle that's the F2 results is probably becoming smaller, and kind of all the work they do for the F1 team is probably becoming a bigger and bigger part.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very fair point. The relationship with junior drivers has changed with the growth of everyone having a formal, pretty much everybody anyway having a formal junior scheme, whereas kind of 20 years ago it was a little bit more ad hoc. They normally have interest in the odd driver there. So if you'd like more of that kind of chat on F2, F3 from Josh and the team, do sign up for the Race Members Club. So head to Patreon, search for the race, or click the link in the episode description for more. Well, thanks very much to Josh and to John for your excellent insights. We're going to be heading to Spa now, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the Belgian Grand Prix.